Okay, students, so this is a review of the ecological relationships. You started this in lab, so you've actually covered most of this already, but we'll just go through really quickly some of the extra things that are coming in this activity. I want to emphasize the difference between interspecific, so between two different species, and intraspecific within the same species. This one was the bottlenose dolphin making the rings in the mud and stirring up bubbles that trap the fish, and so when we're referring to the dolphins working with each other, they're benefiting each other, so it's a beneficial relationship. Both are benefiting, but it's within the same species. It's dolphins and dolphins, and so it would be an intraspecific, so it would be cooperation. But then it also asks about, like, what's the relationship between the dolphins and the fish, right? So the dolphins are benefiting, actors are benefiting, the recipients are being eaten, so in that case it's predation and it's interspecific. And then I've added my gospel perspective in there, that cooperation is a very important thing that I think we need as humans to help fulfill the plan of salvation. And then we have this really awful video online, infanticide. And so in this case, it's the lions competing with each other. They're killing off their rival offspring. And so it's intraspecific, and in this case, the actor is benefiting and the recipient is harmed, but it's at intraspecific, so it's selfishness. And one of the things I want to emphasize here is that we tend to think, oh my gosh, that's so evil, how could they do that? But remember, these are animals and they're not making conscious decisions about doing this. These male lions are not thinking to themselves, if I kill off all these offspring, the females will come into heat. I'll be able to have my own offspring. I don't want to raise offspring that don't belong to me. They're not thinking that at all, right? It's just those with the genes that tend to be aggressive like this towards offspring that are not their own. They're the ones that pass more of their genes on, right? Those who are more aggressive to offspring that are not their own. And so that kind of behavior is selected for because they have more offspring of their own. So that particular gene gets passed on. And unfortunately, we see this in humans as well. So you see this graph of infanticide in humans. It happens. It's one of those natural man, right? And so I talked about how the natural man is an enemy to God. And I think part of that, and again, I want to emphasize that this is just how I've fit this together in my mind. It's not official doctrine. But if I wanted to create a body for the spirits of my children to live in and learn and grow and overcome some of those bad qualities like selfishness, evolution is a great way to create a body that is selfish and that has these tendencies. And so in my mind, the natural man that the scripture is talking about is the evolved body in which we're in that we now have to overcome. And I talked a little bit about this too when we're talking about behavior. Be careful how you judge other people because you have no idea what genetic palette they've been given, that we all have our unique challenges and things that we have to overcome based on a large part on our evolutionary history and our genetics. And so that's what this is talking about. Okay, so then we talked about kin selection and reciprocal altruism. So these are both altruistic behaviors. So going back to this little table, it's where the actor is harmed to benefit someone else. And scientists are very clear that if there isn't actually a benefit, this will not evolve, right? So there has to be some kind of indirect benefit for this to actually take place. So on the surface, it appears altruistic, but there's a reason for it. And so the two that we see are reciprocal altruism. You saw this in the vampire bats, where they kind of keep track. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so there is actually a benefit over time of being this way, of being altruistic in the moment. And then the other is kin selection. So we've actually found lots of evidence of this in lots of different species where their behaviors tend to favor those that are genetically related to them. And again, they don't know that they're favoring people that are genetically, or individuals that are genetically related to them. It's that those with the gene, the altruistic type behavior, they tend to pass it on through their relatives. And so that's how it gets passed on. And it's based on this Hamilton's rule. So we look at the coefficient of relatedness. And so, full siblings are 0.5 or half related, and then you get 0.25 for half siblings and 0.125 or 1/8 for cousins. And so the higher the coefficient of relatedness, the more likely you'll see that particular gene pass on. If they're barely related, then even though one individual might be altruistic, it's not likely that the people that they are saving will have the same genes, right? It has to have a higher coefficient of relatedness. So it's sort of this rule that the benefit to the recipient times the coefficient of relatedness has to outweigh the cost of the individual who's doing the behavior. And they're not necessarily always going to die in doing the behavior, but they're going to be harmed in some way or risk harm in some way. And so there's got to be a benefit to their genes, such that the behavior becomes worth it. And that's the only way that we see this genetically passed on. And so again, they're not aware of their relatedness. It's just that evolution selects for those behaviors that pass through the genetics. And so then we have a couple of really cool examples. If you didn't watch them, it's okay, but there's some really cool examples of altruism, which just seems like crazy. There's no benefit, seemingly no benefit to the organism. So we do always have these freak examples of altruism that do happen, but it's the exception, not the norm. So then we talk about, though, in humans, can there be true altruism? And I would argue that yes, there can, when we're talking about charity or the pure love of Christ. And so that's one of the things that also differentiates us, in that we actually do have the ability to show true altruism that wouldn't be selected for by evolution, because we have the light of Christ. And so you can read through that. And then we looked at the other one that differentiates us, and that's spite. So true spite, not competition where we're hoping to win, but spite where we vindictively hurt another individual at our own expense. And you only see that in humans, because again, that's not going to be selected for. There has to be a benefit. But in true spite or seeking revenge, there's no benefit to you. And so we only see that in us. And so I would argue that that's potentially the reason for that is potentially that the adversary plays a role in our lives. And so it kind of makes us unique. So kind of a cool gospel perspective on some of these symbiotic relationships. But it was just a practice of those symbiotic relationships. That's what this activity was.